I got the LinkedIn profile for Erik Jacobson up over here because he is my guest today on the Beyond the Brief podcast. And if you're a B2B company, working with his company, Hatch, could be a good fit if you're looking to level up your video content strategy. Erik was an early adopter in podcasting and even worked with Tim Ferriss. So do what you do, which is open this on another tab, play it in the background, we get some work done like the rest of us. And let's hear from Erik. I love the personal side of people's story. And we're not just like robots in LinkedIn all botting each other. So I guess give me Erik in like a couple minutes.
Yeah. So probably like the 120-second overview of Erik is, I grew up in Ohio, had fairly normal upbringing, what have you, sports, school, all that kind of stuff. Always had a bit of entrepreneurial tendencies. Growing up, didn't really have much guidance on like how to act on it back then. YouTube didn't exist, all these things to kind of like self-paced learning and figuring it out. So after college, I got a traditional sort of like corporate job in finance for 4 years. About 3 days into that job, I realized this is not good. This is not me.
A whole 72 hours.
Yeah. But I stuck with it because I didn't know what my next move could actually be. So I devoted my time during that 4 years to figuring out how I should actually take my entrepreneurial leap. And the way I did that was listening to podcasts. And that's when I became obsessed with podcasts. This was like 2012. There was not a lot out there. There was really only maybe even a dozen or so, business or entrepreneurial based startup founder, those kind of podcasts. I typed in startups into Apple, iTunes, whatever back then. And I found This Week in Startups. I found Mixergy, and I just became obsessed. So then I realized, okay, maybe I should do something in the podcast space. So yeah, that was pretty much like my progression into, my entrepreneurial career and what I'm doing now.
What did you kind of think you were listening for? Because if you're like pursuing startup podcasts, you're thinking about starting something on your own, but it feels like this almost in hindsight recognition of the medium you were learning on was what you more so fell in love with. Were you thinking of launching a different type of business at first?
Yeah, I didn't know exactly. I didn't know what I had many different ideas, but the thing I realized from listening to those podcasts is what is possible. I went to business school. I studied business. I had never been told or shared or seen case studies of like founders that kind of came from like humble beginnings and like just figured it out on their own and their stories. And so like those episodes showed me what's possible in a million different ways, unlike anything else I had seen. And so I realized I can do it, number one. And then number two, the medium that I learned that information on, I realized how valuable that is and how powerful and impactful that's probably going to be over the next decade. Even though 99% of the people I talked to about it at that time, they literally had no idea what I was talking about when I was talking about podcasts or, these different shows I was listening to. They like family, friends, they literally, because it was such early days back then. But now, flash forward to today and like, podcasts are everywhere and they're, in a lot of ways, they're taking over like the normal mainstream medium. And I think that's only going to continue.
Did you have to move from learning money to learning microphones, I guess, as a first step? Or how did you begin to launch the agency if your background wasn't in actually doing the work?
Yeah. I did not. I decided to try to figure out the business use cases more than the technical use cases of like the mics and the equipment and like all of that stuff. So what I did is I quit my job and I had saved up some retirement money and I had bought a multifamily property that I house hacked basically. So my wife and I lived in one unit. We rented out the other 2 units. I had no housing payment and I took out all my retirement money. So I had a little bit of runway and I was like, all right, I'm going to figure this out. And so what I started doing was I realized how much valuable information was inside of these podcasts, but it was locked up in audio. So I started pitching some of the biggest podcasters in the world via cold DMs on Twitter or email, any way I could pitch them that I could essentially repurpose their episodes into written material, ebooks or newsletters or curated blog posts and stuff like that. So I actually created some, and then in my pitch, I would send that to them. So instead of telling them what I could do, I just showed them. And these things would take me, 10 hours or whatever. But I pitched Tim Ferriss, I pitched Jason Calacanis, I pitched James Altucher, I pitched Andreessen Horowitz and their podcast. And I ended up getting deals with Tim Ferriss and Jason Calacanis at that time of This Week in Startups. And so that I essentially became a, freelancer sort of quote unquote for them for, a year or two. And then that led me to figuring out the business model I could move forward with an agency after that.
Sure. So your deliverables that you were offering were like white papers and blogs and basically like more than a transcription of the podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting.
Because transcripts were like super hard to read, as you know. So like, you could, some of the shows would put transcripts on their show notes page, but even me as like a power user of this content, like I didn't want to really go through it that way. So if you are familiar with Tim Ferriss, like his book, yep. Tools of Titans.
Yeah, I have it.
That's what I was doing basically. So part of that book came like I provided some material that like not in its exact form. He obviously like kind of revised it in his own way, but some of that book and the concept of that book is essentially what I was delivering.
That's awesome, because that book especially is super interesting, and if somebody listening hasn't picked it up, should definitely look through it. The way it's broken out into these kind of cliff notes of these conversations and just the nuggets that are great takeaways. And so what was the leap in your mind then from, okay, so now I'm making these written, succinct versions of these shows, and you saw the model for the agency. What became the model?
So what I realized back then, so I will say, so I tried to get a full-time job on Tim's team.
Okay.
And that didn't work. He's awesome. And that was a great experience. So but after that, it didn't really pan out. It didn't make sense at that time, I think, for him and like what he was doing. So that was, no problem, no harm, no foul. But then I realized like, I don't want to be a freelancer basically, or like a solo, founder, kind of like doing the work and the fulfillment and the sales and the marketing, like all of that stuff. Yeah. Which I think that's a really good model for a lot of people. But just for me, I wanted to try to kind of build a business around it. So what I saw during that time was authors mostly who would go and be on Tim's podcast as a guest, and then like 75 other podcasts as a sort of blitz PR effort around their book launch timeframe. And I saw that, and this was like 2015, 2016. And I'm like, thinking to myself that every founder and CEO should be doing that exact same thing for their business, because these audiences are already built. They're niche audiences, so you can get in front of the right people, and then you can quote unquote be everywhere over a fairly quick period of time. And so if they listen to 7 shows that are all in a similar category, you can appear on every single one. And then all of a sudden you've just blanketed your market in that channel. And it's like, they have to know who you are at that point.
Sure.
And so that's the original agency model I created. Was a different company. I'm running Hatch now, but this company was called Lemon Pie.
Yep.
And that's what I did for the first 5-6 years. Was we were essentially a PR agency, but we were just focused on the channel of podcasts. So we would help our CEO clients get interviewed on dozens and dozens of podcasts in their market.
Did something else draw your interest when it came to Hatch and creating podcasts, and now also the video component? Did it draw your interest, or do you feel like the Lemon Pie model stopped working so well?
No, the Lemon Pie model worked well, and it's still running today. I am 100% focused on Hatch. I essentially exited that business. But what started happening is our clients started saying like, well, I'm going on a bunch of podcasts. This is great. Should we create our own for our own business? And so they kind of pulled us into that. And then we started our journey on essentially helping them create their own channels, their own podcasts, YouTube, and then all the offshoots of that now exist much more in today's marketing environment than they did in 2018, 2019, like short form video clips, LinkedIn, social, YouTube shorts, all of that kind of stuff. But I essentially realized that the PR model is a very good model. I believe everybody should do it, but it's a tactic. It's something you could do for honestly in perpetuity because new shows are created every single month. So really like the supply replenishes. So by the time you get to the end of your first batch, there's very likely a whole new batch you can go target. But it's a very specific tactic. I wanted to build what I'm now doing with Hatch as more of like a true strategy that leans into what I believe is like the future of marketing. And that's what I think we're doing now, with Hatch.
So unlock a little bit of that for us, like your kind of predictions for the next year and how you're setting up what Hatch is doing. Because Hatch has been around, 4 years now?
Yeah. Yeah,
off of the back of a long legacy with Lemon Pie. So, I mean, you're not new to this game. What are the trends you're beginning to see now?
Yeah. So podcast has evolved in a very big way. They're no longer, you definitely still can, but they're no longer an audio first medium, in my opinion. And podcast is like this term that maybe isn't even the right term anymore. Really what these are shows. They're TV shows. Like we can think of them as a TV show for your business. And so all of the platforms that exist to do marketing on these days, for the most part, are prioritizing video. Like they're rewarding video. Even LinkedIn over the last 6 to 8 months has now rolled out their video tab and their video feed. And my prediction over the next 12 months is they may even switch their default feed to be the video feed.
Ooh.
And then now the tab at the very bottom is like, legacy feed or whatever. And so the point with that is like, we need to be creating video content because this is just the way that the platforms are operating. And they're operating that way because it's the way that people like to consume content at a very high rate. So that's one. Like video is a mega trend. Like that's very clear, very obvious for everybody to see. The other thing is a little bit less reliance now in marketing on direct response marketing, like conversion related content, like creating SEO optimized blog posts that are meant to get people to convert to a demo because they're actively searching out a solution. And so like what we know now is that there's really only 5% of your market that is at any given time actively searching out a solution for a product like yours. But most companies over the last 10 years have almost entirely dedicated their marketing budget to that 5%.
Sure, fascinating.
And they are completely disregarding the 95% that in 6 months, they are your buyers, but in 6 months, they might be in market. So how can we build a relationship with them now before they move in market so that when they do, when their contract with your competitor is up and they're ready to look at a new vendor for that solution, you've been providing content to them that has helped them, educated them, inspired them, and they see you as the number one option at that time. They don't go to Google. They don't need to ask a friend. That you're already on the short list day one. Like that's literally the goal of marketing, in my opinion, in a major way in 2025 is like, how do we get to be number one, number two, or number three on the short list? Day one, they move into, I need a solution in this category. Who do I know in that category already before searching around? And so it's, those will close at higher rates. Those usually have higher LTVs, like just all the good things that happen because of the trust that's been built up with this content first approach to marketing, which is based around consumption. We want them to consume the content, get value from it. We're not looking to pitch them today because we know they're not even necessarily in market today, but they are our ICP, they are our buyers, and someday they will be. And so that's really like the trends that we're leaning into with Hatch.
Do you have any sort of strategies related to, like, obviously Gary V is kind of famous for every fourth, share, ask for something. Do you guys have any, not metrics, but do you have any frameworks or strategies that you begin to implement into some of the services you're doing?
Yeah, every client's a little bit different on and how they like to approach it. There's not a one size fits all. Generally speaking, the more that you make an ask in the content or make the content feel like it is a pitch for something, the less successful organically it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So what I prefer, not across the board 100% of the time, but generally, is the organic content is purely meant to provide value and build credibility and trust, and then combine that with paid, and the paid is the CTA. And the cool thing is organic plus paid do not have to be separated. They can actually be one strategy in unison. So like, this is something I also believe is like, we're moving into a world where the ads in a lot of cases will and should be first originated as an organic piece of content that the market tells you based on the engagement to that is something that they like. And then turn that into an ad because you already have confirmation that the audience likes it, and then just modify it a little bit and put a CTA there.
Yeah, very smart.
So sort of make the ask via the ad, but prove it with organic and build organic on its own.
That's pretty fascinating. It makes so much sense. I mean, it becomes the active focus group that, used to be 10 people in a room with bad coffee telling you what ad would work. Yes. And now it's your actual audience. It's funny. I kind of did something somewhat recently. It felt a little bit vulnerable. We, over the last 6 months as a video agency, have positioned our offering to be around, I'll describe, and I'll tell you why I'm describing it. Basically a 90-second video that shows who you are, what you offer, to who you offer, and the reasons to believe. And often lives on someone's website or goes into sales enablement and gets micro-contented down into ads or other testimonials, things like that. So what I realized was the semantics around what people were calling that main video were all over the place. And so I posted a poll that I just described it. And I said, what do you call this? We know how to make it really well, but the title that it needs to be hung above the product, help us name it. And everything from like hero video to explainer video to brand explainer to we got a ton on brand video. And so I felt so grateful for my audience of people to just like give input. And then also on top of it, to have a couple of top runners to now be able to do a new poll around to say, okay, let's hone this in even further. Is it brand video or do you like something more? And so in some ways, I'm just resonating with what you're saying, where we can get so much more information from our audience that we sometimes give credit for to then make big decisions with.
100%. And the platforms are enabling this now. Like LinkedIn has thought leader ads.
Yeah.
So you can run an ad from your personal profile. Like the more an ad on a platform looks like the normal content that is posted on that platform, the more successful that ad will be. So that's why an ad that originated as organic content that performed well organically, that then gets turned into a thought leader ad on LinkedIn, for example, will perform better on average than a direct response, click here to book a demo type of ad. And the same thing exists on YouTube. The targeting is not as great, but you can do the exact same thing on YouTube. You can have a YouTube first strategy, and then some of those videos will outperform, and they may just naturally create demand for your company based on the things you're talking about. Here's the steps to do X, Y, Z. And you lay it all out and you provide value, and they could go run with it. But oh, by the way, if you use our company, we can make this much easier. That's a perfect example of something to post organically, prove success with, and then run as paid to everybody in your market.
So what are some of the hangups that a lot of folks encounter when they go to have their company? And let's just say, make up an avatar, a company doing, 50 million a year, let's say, in technology, and they have a marketing team, but some of the nuance, I think, of what you're sharing when it comes to video and podcast, they're very specific and maybe different than what some in-house video teams might know or be doing. What are some of the common hangups that then lead them to work with you guys at Hatch?
Yeah, so I would say efficiency
Mm.
And versus inefficiency. That's a pretty important one. And when I say efficiency versus inefficiency, essentially I'm looking at a few different categories for that. It is the process, it is the price, and it is the product. And so the process meaning like, is this process of executing this strategy on a weekly and monthly basis sustainable for everybody involved? Is it sustainable? Is it consistent? Because one of the challenges with an organic led, video led, social led strategy is not sticking with it long enough to see the fruits of the labor. There's incredible amounts of leverage to be had. The same cost, the same time investment into this strategy can lead to a variable amount of success over time, which is usually not true for other marketing. If you want to go get leads from outbound or you want to go get leads from paid, usually you have to pay more to get more. But if you are able to consistently execute on this organic strategy, literally the same inputs of effort and costs and everything can lead to a multiplier over time of the outcomes that you get from it. So number one is just like, can we consistently execute on this? It doesn't burn anybody out. It's totally, we can replicate it on a weekly and monthly basis.
Yeah.
The next is cost. Like,
and before we move on to cost real quick, what do you observe as average time to be? It's like the stock market a little bit, right? You're like dripping money in and the results are compounding. What do you see as maybe some inflection points to success? Anything to benchmark? I'm putting you on the spot.
No. This is all something that you should see. You should see indicators quickly. Like, you won't necessarily see, okay, pipeline of revenue 30 days in. We should not. That's honestly like a really detrimental way to look at this. Is we need pipeline and revenue immediately, or else we're going to cancel it.
Sure.
But what you should see in 30 to 60 days is a feedback loop that is getting started. You should see comments, you should see DMs, you should be getting on a sales call and like somebody says something about the content. Maybe they didn't come from it, but like they saw it or something. You should be getting a feedback loop that like what we're putting out. Step one is like what we're putting out resonates. That's step one. It's like, we need people to care about this and want to consume it. Otherwise, we're just checking the box that we have a podcast or we have a YouTube channel, but that doesn't equal success. We need it to resonate with our market. And so if you're seeing that 30 to 60 days, this is going to work. And then it's just a matter of dialing it in and doing it for long enough.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. You need to work out more than once to get as jacked as I am, obviously. So don't expect results immediately. But the indicators, right? The offhand mention of like, yeah, I saw that. Even if it was just the post about the show. They didn't even engage, but it's just that one additional touch point. And let me ask this before we move on to cost. And you might correct me here, because we made a decision to launch this show, Beyond the Brief, under a separate brand than our video agency, Union. Did I do that based on much strategy? No, not a ton. I tend to move fast and break things. But what have you seen when it comes to having things nest under the brand of the main company or the thought leader versus a separate show title and URL and that kind of thing?
I think both can work. There's case studies of both of those working very well. Yeah. So and that's honestly my opinion about most stuff in content. Everything works, but it's your situation that might guide and dictate like what path you might want to take. Like, agency service provider is different than SaaS. It's different, like different than media company. Like, there's all different different business models and things might dictate resources, team members, expertise, all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What I generally think is most people should probably keep it connected to the company, only for the reason that we're inherent in my philosophy around good content is like not pitching your services too much.
Right.
But what we want is like more eyeballs, more people listening, more people reading, more people watching, all of that stuff. And we want to make it easier for them when they're watching, when they're reading, when they're clicking, when they're downloading, all of that. Just click over to our company.
Yeah.
Like, that's almost the path, to be honest with you, is like, and so usually having a smaller gap of that jump from like this media property to like who it's made by and what they do is usually a little more beneficial. But I do think that the separate brand, especially if you're like, no, we're going to do this, like we're going all in on this, especially for you guys, like as a video company, I think it makes all the sense in the world because it's like that this is essentially what your product is as well. And so this is not like, you know, the fourth or fifth priority of your marketing strategy. This is probably like one of the top, it's like the top one or number two. And so like going all in with it in terms of like a media property like that, I do think is a good approach when you have that mindset of like, we're going to go all in on this. And we want this to be a place that our entire market would like subscribe to and get value out of, even if they never work with us.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, I think of it too, that our audience, you know, you had mentioned before, they might not be ready to buy now. They might be ready to buy in 6 months. They might be ready to buy in 2 years. They might be ready to buy in 5 years when they're actually big enough to afford it. And you know, I think of folks, you know, I know you work with Dave Gearhart. You know, I think of other people, Donald Miller, folks that I've like listened to their stuff for a long time. And I didn't become a customer for years, but, you know, I did eventually turn into one for both of those guys. All right. So we've talked about consistency. That's one of the core things that working with an outside agency like Hatch is going to provide, that you're not going to have to worry about other priorities coming up in the team who's creating that content to get pulled off and you lose steam. So then I think you're about to dive into the price.
Yeah. So this is not like necessarily about Hatch's price. It's just more about the cost to executing this strategy as a whole needs to be something like in my opinion, the appropriate budget for something like this for your company is the amount you could afford to spend forever without ever stopping. And that amount may change. Like that amount is obviously different depending on the company. And it may change as time goes on. Maybe you allocate a little bit more, like a little bit less in the beginning, but then you start seeing a little bit of momentum and you're like, okay, cool, this is working. Let's now level this up. I'm a big fan of stair-stepping your way into this and not necessarily having it to be this like big moonshot right out of the gate where you're like, okay, we're going to spend $300,000 on 10 episodes. I think very few companies, unless, you know, like, and really only those at a certain scale should do something like that because you're putting all your eggs in that basket. And then after 10 episodes, like, can you afford to keep doing that forever? There are places and times for those like one-time moonshots. But again, I think it's much better. Same thing with like episode cadence or, you know, volume. It's better to start smaller, but execute it perfectly than it is to try to do it at a level that you maybe are trying to jump to a little too quickly. And like, if it doesn't work, then now we can't afford this budget anymore. And then the time scale you're looking at for when does it not work is like 90 days. So you're really just setting yourself up for failure from the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it has to be sustainable from a cost perspective to just run that engine.
And I would imagine for some of those moonshot moments, it's maybe a product launch, you know, a rebrand, you know, something major is happening where you're wanting to kind of make this additional effort to pad either the launch up to or the announcement of and following something like that. And I'd imagine that's maybe when a lot of people begin to engage you. Is that true, I guess?
Yeah. So when I see some of the moonshot stuff, a lot of times I really would only recommend it for like Series D companies. Like if you're doing more than 100 million a year, and you know, these are sometimes like these narrative style shows where they're like telling stories or they're fictional. Like there's not expertise from your company being shared to build trust with your company. They're more so like, we want to get people to listen to this cool podcast we made. And then, by the way, it's presented by our company. And so I think that there's definitely a time and place for that, but it's almost like, well, you could put $300,000 into podcast advertisements if you just want a bunch of people to know the name of your company.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
You don't necessarily need to create the show. And so I just think there's different times and places and use cases for that. But I'm just a much bigger fan of like the subject matter expertise led version that's more sustainable to start, that builds trust with the 95% than the moonshot. We have to go big right away and get leads as fast as possible. I usually don't see those panning out very well. And most of those shows stop. And so what that tells me is if they weren't worth continuing to do, then maybe they weren't worth doing. So yeah, just some thoughts. Again, not always black and white and not, 100% of the time, but just, yeah, some thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. And one thing I think is interesting is now there's people who engage over time with your content or similar thinking and are believers in this and have done the research. But for somebody who is an internal stakeholder who's maybe above the person making the decision, the advocate for bringing, somebody like you guys in, what seem to be some of the ROI and business reasons that can kind of be that are often pointed back to? Again, we're probably talking a lot of just simply marketing analytics or lead generation or things like that. But could you take us into some of those conversations?
Yeah, ROI. This is almost like a philosophical thing with this type of strategy. You will see pipeline generation from this. But what you won't be able to do is measure that the same way that you measure digital attribution from your normal lead gen focused sources of, paid ads or SEO content and stuff like that, because there's usually no clicks. There's no clicks to come through. So really what you're doing is you're creating content that over time people build affinity to your company. And then when they're ready, they just go to your website. So you don't know what YouTube video, what podcast, what clip was the thing. And it obviously, there's usually not just one of those. It's the collection of all of it over time that leads them to just type in your website in Google or directly. And so the only way you'll know if that is actually working the way you intended is if you have something like self-reported attribution, or you go through win-loss analysis, or more of the manual, like directional things than the click sourced based attribution. And so I just say that because you can think that this is not working sometimes if you're looking at it from like UTM tags on links that are in the description of your YouTube video. Like if you're expecting people to click that link in the description, and that's the only way you're measuring success is how many people click it and then book a sales call, this is not going to work because that's not how people operate for the most part. And so really what this is like, do you believe in a content-led strategy that's a more modern content strategy than like SEO keyword-based as a means to acquire customers over time? Then if you do, you need a source of that content. You need pillar pieces of content. And so to me, a podcast or a video series or even a short form video series is a way to create that consistent, always on. You need an always on vehicle of content to be able to power the different channels that you're focused on. And then on the side, you can have these campaigns that are more one-time things, but I believe you need an always on source. And so to me, it's really just like, do you believe in this model of marketing in 2025? And if you do, it's almost like, we just have to do this. And the main KPI is like, are more people listening, watching, reading month over month? And if so, then this is working. It's not how many leads can we perfectly attribute that came through in month 2, month 3, month 4. It's more, are the right people consuming the content, and are we getting more of them to consume it over time? And then for a fact that this is working. Like I've had, even just with our content and our show, I can't tell you how many sales calls have started with, I listened to your podcast. And sometimes these are public companies, like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 person companies, like they're marketing, they're content leaders. And I would have never been able to know that from any normal digital, attribution. And so, yeah, it's more so, do you believe in this methodology overall? And if you do, then this is a vehicle to do that.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think just the awareness that it is a mix of ingredients. Salt might not be your favorite part of cookies when you think about it, but if it wasn't there, something would be missing, certainly, right? For you guys, is there a certain type of company that tends to be a great fit I know, like I mentioned, I know you guys are working with Dave Gearhart. This is a very like founder brand, I think is his book, but a founder brand style. And there's a lot of other companies like that. Is somebody with a founder brand an especially good fit for this? And if a brand isn't operating that way, what are you deciding, or how are you guiding people when it comes to who's in your show, maybe the topics, but let's just start with like kind of who's in your show, who's going to be that face?
Yeah, I think that's really important because a face of a content brand usually on average performs better on all platforms than it being sort of like the company's podcast or the company's YouTube channel. There are obviously risks, and people, think about that. Well, what if this person leaves, and stuff like that? Those can all be solved for. But yeah, our focus is on like the B2B business use case of this content. So obviously there's many influencers, authors, like all those kind of people who are absolutely crushing this type of content, but we don't focus on that. So we focus on how can we help B2B companies transition from a more keyword focused, conversion focused style of content through the tools to now this more social first, consumption focused content for the platforms using video in the way that their buyers are consuming content today. And that's in the data. This is how people consume content. They watch YouTube videos, they listen to podcasts, they read their favorite weekly newsletter, they're on LinkedIn, they're in communities. This is where people are getting their sources of information. So if we're not providing any information in those places, then we are definitely going to be behind. And so yeah, that's really our focus, is like being the best in the world at helping companies do that.
And we're in 2025 now. It's February, to I guess timestamp this episode. What are you excited about for what's ahead with Hatch? What are you guys kind of working on under the hood?
I'm very excited about something that we do now, but that more companies are starting to adopt. And it's exciting because I think it's the final frontier that's blue ocean in B2B marketing, which is YouTube. It's so small, the percentage of companies that are really doing a YouTube first strategy, and the arbitrage that exists on that channel, on that platform, is massive right now, with the amount of demand and supply on the platform in terms of like who is on the platform consuming content, which every market has their buyers consuming content on it. But then compared against the amount of companies that are trying to really, really, really provide a first-class A+ YouTube first strategy to meet those viewers and get attention and awareness and subscribers from them. So I think that's what I'm really spending a lot of time on right now, is like the YouTube opportunity and more companies now. I think YouTube right now is where podcasts were 5 years ago.
Fascinating. I mean, if I'm hearing this right, you're saying your prediction is that YouTube is kind of coming into a new renaissance of itself, because this is obviously not a new platform. This is old news in a lot of ways, but there's a missing component when it comes to B2B. I think of some of the people I do see on there. Monday.com comes to mind, right away, or ClickUp does quite a bit.
HubSpot.
Right on there. Slack, sure. What are some of the initial conversations or some of the ideation? I want to kind of get just for a moment into maybe a touch of creative strategy when it comes to just blue ocean of YouTube. You can look at what's working on there, right? You can, go watch every Mr. Beast video and say, okay, how can we repurpose this? But what is a more fast track way when people come to you say, hey, we do want to push a YouTube first strategy? What are some of those initial first steps into figuring out what your show could be?
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be a show. So what's nice about YouTube is like it has all stages of the funnel in it. And what I mean by that is it has top of funnel, mid funnel, and bottom of funnel. So you can create super top of funnel content, which I honestly would kind of put in the category of like a video podcast. That's like, especially if it's guest dependent, that is just getting people into your orbit, like essentially like capturing them at that very top of the funnel. Mid funnel on YouTube, and I'm just talking about YouTube from this like funnel perspective. Mid funnel is like those true YouTube style videos that are 5 to 15 minutes long, and it's one of your subject matter experts breaking down how to do something.
Yeah, that's great.
Lessons. Like these are the things that like, those are the videos that your buyers would like share in their Slack channel of like, we have to do this.
Yes.
And those are the things that build you up as the trusted expert in that space. So that's that mid funnel, the frameworks, the playbooks, all of that stuff. And then bottom of funnel is obviously YouTube is owned by Google. And so there's incredible amounts of search, keyword search based somewhat intent on that platform as well. So you can create, and I know that's not really our like real focus, but like that does exist there. Like it is important to capture those. And so you can do that there. So it has a little bit of everything, which is what I like. And most B2B companies, 99%, using it as a repository to upload videos to just kind of like put them up there. There's real no intent around the packaging, which is incredibly important. The thumbnail, the title, getting people to click it, and then getting people to view the video as long as possible because it delivers on what you promised. And the last thing I'll mention is this is something that B2B has an advantage of on YouTube over creators. Creators obviously they dominate YouTube. They're really good at creating content. What B2B has over creators is two things. One, they have expertise in the topic. Most creators are really good at creating content, but they don't have domain expertise that a chief information security officer or a chief people officer or a VP of marketing would really get value out of. So you have domain expertise sitting inside your company that is relevant to your buyers. So that's an advantage. Now it's just about figuring out how do we create something that is easy and nice to watch. That's the content product. The second thing that B2B has over creators on YouTube is they usually will have a little bit more budget to unlock some paid in combination with their organic. And so you can target your videos can show up on the homepage of anybody who subscribes to these channels. Like if they subscribe to those channels, you can pay $5 a day to get your video to appear on that person's homepage when they log into YouTube. Or retargeting or keyword based or uploading your email list and getting all those people to now, get a recommended video on their side of their YouTube. And that's your video sitting right there, which most creators don't have budget for. And so,
right, sure. Not initially.
Yeah. So I just think that this is almost like the final platform or strategy that has not been cracked by most B2B marketers. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. And I appreciate you just right now live building my YouTube strategy for this show and let this be a milestone where people can look back and be like, oh yeah, that's when those guys started paying $5 a day for some ads to get in front of these other people. Amazing. All right. Well, we're like running out of time for the show. And it did bring up one more question. If you have a second, I'd like your take on what Spotify's doing related to video content and their creator side. And I'm getting, video podcasts pushed kind of more than ever. We're uploading shorts attached to each of our shows, audio versions of shows. What are you seeing within the B2B world related to Spotify?
I've been a very big believer in Spotify for a very long time. One of the main reasons is their founder and CEO, Daniel Ek. I think he makes a lot of good decisions related to their platform and content. They've been all in on podcasts for a while. Some of their podcast stuff did not work out. Now they're kind of expanding the aperture of like what their focus is, what the value prop is to content creators on Spotify. And like you said, they're now leaning more into video first because they realize this is where the world has gone. I think it's something to play with and experiment with. I do not think that they're going to overtake YouTube in that spot of like video shows or video first content in this way that we're describing being the platform of choice. So Spotify overtook Apple for audio content because Apple is asleep at the wheel. They created podcasting and they've probably had like one person working on it in their entire company for like the last 15 years. And so Spotify innovated their product, provided a great experience for their users, and they have overtaken Apple in an audio platform of choice. YouTube is not asleep at the wheel. And they are innovating for creators on their platform as well. So I think it's a good place to experiment in because I do think that there is some arbitrage there, but I don't think you should prioritize it over YouTube. I think YouTube should be your platform of choice, but have Spotify be 5%, 10% experimentation time.
That's good, and it aligns with what we're doing as well. We're getting some stuff up, a short that goes with each audio episode as it goes, and we're going to continue to kind of look for signals, and if something really does ramp up there, we have like a baseline to have, little foundation to have started from. Certainly we need to pick our channels and our energy and our budget wisely. And I think everything you shared here today is going to help a lot of B2B companies do exactly that.
Yeah, it's because first mover does matter. Some of the biggest podcasts in the world, one reason that most people don't talk about that is a reason they're number one or number two or number 10 or whatever, is they've been doing it for 10 years.
Right.
They started when nobody else was doing it. And so that does exist with like this Spotify opportunity. It's like, let's be there. Let's not focus on it. But if this does end up turning into, a really great opportunity and place to be, we will already have content there and be we'll reap the benefits of being a first mover to it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it is, you got to dip your toe in everywhere and begin to see what happens a little bit. All right. Last time, your very quick take on premium content when it comes to high production. Mm-hmm. Let's say high production value, use the word lightly. From the back end, I'd say maybe high production cost, premium looking stuff that takes crews and takes scripting time and some things like that. Where does its place live right now in 2025? Especially when, a lot of your top of funnel or paid ads, like you said, is organic content that's being repurposed as ads because it was already shown as winners. Is that going to go away? Is our traditional commercial going to go away? Are we going to lose our brand videos? It doesn't feel like it. We got a ton of incoming and that's going well. But I want to know just kind of your predictions and thoughts.
No, I'm a big believer in production value. I think there are people who say it doesn't matter. But to me, like usually what that is just not wanting to put in the effort. Like your studio setup, for example, like that took effort to set up. Now you've got it. Like it looks fantastic. And like, when you're scrolling on a feed and you're competing for attention, like there's 10 different things on that feed that's trying to literally get that person to pay attention to their thing.
Yeah, it's great.
Your setup is going to disrupt that feed. Like it's going to stand out and look different and give people that split second pause of like, this looks legit. The content has to deliver. Like you can't have, a beautiful looking setup and like good production value on the post-production editing and like how everything looks, but then the content is surface level. And that goes without saying. But I don't believe we're in an environment anymore where the content quality, quote unquote, which is subjective, by the way,
of course,
is the only thing that matters. That was true 5 years ago, but that's not true now. Like, and I believe you should give yourself every single advantage you can, which is that this is something that's easily in your control, which is like, let's spend, the 10 hours or whatever to get our setup to look incredible. And then let's make sure we have a post-production process that isn't using an AI editing tool that looks like every other video clip or every other video. And let's just give ourselves that advantage. It's not going to be the thing that dictates we succeed or we don't, but it's, if you've got 10 things that each could lead to 10% of the total success, and this is one of them, it's very easily in your control. Why not do it? So, and if you look at like all the most of the most successful, I would say at this point, most of the most successful creators, content creators in B2B or just in general on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, most of them don't have Zoom recordings.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Where they're like using AirPods and they're like in a dark part of their closet or something. And there's a reason for that. So we have to look at what is successful right now. What is the look of that? What is the feel of that? And we can't just think, well, my content's good. I just want to, we don't need to worry about that right now.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think what you said is the takeaway that everyone should pull, which is that if you can do 10 things that improve things 10%, there is the 100% of the change that you need to make to drive impact. Thanks for your time today. People are going to need to look you guys up at Hatch and follow you on LinkedIn. I've been watching your stuff for a while. Super valuable. So plug there. Go look up Erik. And thanks for watching Beyond the Brief.
Thanks, Dustin. Appreciate it, man.